I was at home when my phone rang. It was my son, his voice tight and urgent. Dad, is my wife home? I just saw someone who looks exactly like her boarding a plane with another man. A few seconds later, he sent me a photo. I froze. In the living room, my daughter-in-law was doing yoga on the mat. She looked up at me and smiled as if nothing had happened. My heart nearly stopped. If she was standing right in front of me, then who was the person boarding that plane with my son? I'm incredibly grateful you're here. Quick question: how did you find this channel? YouTube recommendations of friends share. Drop a comment below. I read them all. Just a heads up, this story includes fictionalized elements for educational and entertainment purposes. Any resemblance to actual people or places is coincidental, but the protective lessons I'm sharing, those could genuinely help you safeguard your loved ones. My name is Camden Pierce. I'm 59 years old, a widower and a forensic accountant who spent 3 decades following money trails most people worked hard to bury. After my wife Eleanor passed away 5 years ago, my son Brett became the center of my world. When he married Rachel 2 years later, I believed our family felt whole again. That was 3 years ago. I was wrong. I was reviewing quarterly statements when Brett called. His voice was tight, breathless. Dad, is Rachel home right now? I set down my pen. Morning light filtered through the windows of our Pinehurst home. What's going on? A pause. Behind him, I heard the hum of an aircraft cabin. Muffled voices. Air vents overhead, bins closing. I'm in the cockpit at gate C7. My flight to Maui is boarding. During pre-flight checks, I looked through the flight deck window and saw someone in seat 3A who looks exactly like Rachel. Business class. She's with a man I don't recognize. They're holding hands. My pulse shifted. You're certain? I'm trained to notice details. Burgundy sweater. The floral scarf I bought her last month. She's wearing your pearl earrings, the ones you gave her at our wedding. I stood slowly. Where did she say she was this week? Denver. Extended nonprofit board meeting. She left 2 weeks ago. But if that's her in 3A on my plane to Maui, then everything she told me was a lie. Can you take a photo? Already did. I'm sending it. Dad, if that's really her, who did I say goodbye to this morning when I called home? My phone vibrated. The image loaded, grainy but clear enough. Seat 3, a burgundy sweater, floral. Silk scarf, pearl earrings catching cabin light, 3 pearls set in gold. A man sat beside her in 3B mid 40S navy suit. His hand rested casually on her knee. Their heads leaned close. The woman's profile, Rachel's face. Rachel's smile. Do you see it? Brett asked. I see it. That's her. The scarf, the earrings. If she's boarding my flight right now, then who's in our house? Give me 1 minute, I said. I walked into the living room. Sunlight streamed across the hardwood floor. A yoga mat was spread out. Rachel was in downward dog, breathing steady. I'd watched that routine every morning for 5 years. She glanced up. Dad. Everything. Okay. The word felt natural. Since the wedding, she'd slipped into our family with ease, filling the quiet Laner left behind. Brett called, I said evenly. Wanted to make sure you were home. She lowered into a seated stretch. That's sweet. Tell him I'm fine. My phone's in the kitchen on silent. You know I don't like distractions. I studied her face. The freckle near her left temple. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear. Everything matched. Back in my office. I called Brett. She's here doing yoga. Says her phone's on silent. Silence. Dad, did you see the photo I did? I can still see her through the cockpit window. She just laughed at something. He set his hands on her arm now. If that's Rachel on my plane, then who's in our house? I felt my chest tighten. You said she left for Denver 2 weeks ago. Yes, Wednesday morning. I opened our home security system. Let me check. Something. I scrolled back. This morning, Rachel on her mat. Yesterday, making breakfast. The day before, reading on the couch. 2 weeks ago. Timestamp 6:47 a.m. The front door opened. Rachel stepped out with a rolling suitcase blue wool coat. She locked the door and walked to a black SUV idling at the curb. It pulled away. I kept the footage running. 7:05 a.m. 18 minutes later, the front door opened again. A woman entered. Same height, same build, same hair color, but she wore a gray cardigan instead of a blue coat, no suitcase. She moved slowly through the house, looking around, carefully studying. She opened cabinets, checked the refrigerator, ran her hand along the granite countertop as if memorizing texture. She selected a coffee mug, the chipped one Rachel refused to throw away. This woman knew which mug to use. "Bread," I said steadily. "When you land, observe her from a distance. Don't approach. Don't let her know you're watching. See where she goes, who she meets. Then call me. You think it's really Rachel that my wife is on my plane with another man?" I stared at the split-screen footage. On the left, Rachel leaving. On the right, someone else arriving. "I think we need more information." "What kind?" "The kind that explains how your wife can be in two places at once." After he hung up, the house felt unnervingly quiet. Through the wall I heard movement, water running, cabinets closing. The ordinary sounds of someone who knew exactly where everything belonged. The woman who looked like Rachel sounded like Rachel knew which burner heated most evenly and where we kept spare light bulbs. The woman who had been living in my house for 2 weeks. I opened my laptop and began pulling financial records. If someone was impersonating my daughter-in-law, there would be traces, subtle inconsistencies, patterns. Numbers don't lie. 3 hours later, my phone buzzed. Followed them from baggage claim. Brett texted black sedan to Fairmont Orchid. Watched from lobby. They checked in together. Same room. "Dad, what's happening?" I looked toward my office door. Beyond it, the woman who wasn't Rachel hummed softly in the kitchen. I typed slowly. "Come home as soon as you can. Don't confront her." "Not yet." His reply came instantly. "Who is?" "That woman in our house." I stared at the frozen security footage. Two women, one leaving, one arriving. 18 minutes apart. My fingers hovered over the keyboard before I typed the only honest answer I had. "I don't know, but I'm going to find out." The next morning arrived with the kind of clarity that comes after a sleepless night. I'd spent hours staring at financial spreadsheets trying to make sense of the impossible. By dawn, I'd made a decision. Confrontation would come eventually, but first I needed certainty. In my 20 years advising clients on fraud cases, I'd learned that assumption gets you nowhere. Evidence is everything. I found her in the kitchen around 8 making breakfast. She moved with easy confidence, reaching for the coffee filters without hesitation, knowing exactly which cabinet held the good mugs. She'd mastered the choreography of our household perfectly. I poured myself coffee, watching her slice fruit. The morning light caught her profile, and for a moment the resemblance was so complete it made my chest ache. Except it wasn't Rachel. I knew that now with cold certainty. I kept my voice casual. "Brett and Rachel's anniversary is coming up soon. Remember that dinner you two had in Portland?" He mentioned wanting to go back to that restaurant. She looked up, knife paused mid-slice. "Oh yes, that was lovely. The waterfront view was beautiful." Wrong. They'd celebrated in Seattle at a small French place Rachel had insisted on. Rachel would have corrected me immediately, probably with a laugh, about how I always mixed up their travel plans. This woman just smiled and kept cutting strawberries. Throughout the morning, I watched her perform the role flawlessly. She watered Ella Lenar's herb garden with care. She folded laundry with precise movements. She even hummed while she worked, though the melody was wrong. Rachel hummed old jazz standards. This woman hummed something contemporary I didn't recognize. Small details, tiny inconsistencies, but they added up. Around noon, I called David Torres. We'd worked together on several cases over the years. If anyone could trace digital footprints without raising alarms, it was David. I kept my voice low, standing in my office with the door closed. "I need you to check something for me," discreetly. "My family accounts. I need to know if there's been any unusual access in the past few weeks." He didn't ask why. "Give me an hour." While I waited, I made coffee. She appeared in the doorway, watching me with that concerned expression Rachel often wore. "You seem distracted today, Dad." "Everything all right?" I measured grounds carefully, not looking up. "Just busy week ahead. You know how quarter end gets." She accepted this and returned to the living room. I watched her go, noting how she stirred her coffee. 2 quick circles, no tap on the rim. Rachel had a specific ritual. 3 circles clockwise, 2 taps with the spoon. Then she'd set it down on the right side of her cup. Always, every single time. For 5 years. This woman didn't know that. David called back within the hour. "Camden, you were right to be concerned. There's a second device logged into your joint accounts. Has been for about 2 weeks." My hand tightened on the phone. "Location, Maui. Someone's been monitoring all your financial activity. Bank accounts, credit cards. Everything. They set up an email forwarding rule too. All correspondence from your financial institutions is being copied to an external address." I thought about the security footage. Rachel leaving at 6:47. This woman arriving at 7:05. 18 minutes to switch places. And in that time, someone had locked down their access to every account we shared. "What else can you tell me?" The sound of typing came through the line. "Recent charges from Maui, Fairmont, Orchid Resort, Tiffany and Company, Roy's Restaurant. Want me to keep going?" "No." My voice came out flat. "That's enough. There's one more thing. Withdrawal pattern. Small amounts, always under 10000. 9800 exactly, multiple times over the past 3 months. Classic structuring to avoid federal reporting requirements. Whoever was behind this understood financial regulations. They'd been planning this carefully, moving money in amounts that wouldn't trigger automatic alerts." "Can you trace where the withdrawals went?" "Offshore accounts. I can dig deeper, but that takes time and leaves footprints." "Do it, but carefully." After I hung up, I sat, staring at my computer screen. The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture I didn't want to see. This wasn't simple deception. This was sophisticated fraud, the kind that required planning, coordination, and inside knowledge. I heard her moving around in the next room, humming that wrong melody. She'd been here for 2 weeks, living in our home, sleeping in our guest room, playing the role of daughter-in-law with practiced ease. And somewhere in Maui, someone had been watching through our accounts, monitoring every transaction, every email, every digital footprint we left. My phone buzzed. A text from David. "Second device is actively monitoring right now. Whoever's on the other end, they're watching in real time." I looked at my closed office door, thought about the woman on the other side moving through our house with confidence born from careful study, thought about Rachel in Hawaii with a man whose name I didn't know, thought about Brett coming home tomorrow expecting to find his wife waiting for him. Instead, he'd find an actress who knew which mug to use but couldn't remember where they'd celebrated their anniversary. Another text arrived. "You, Camden, this is bigger than identity theft. The offshore accounts, the monitoring, the structuring, this is organized, professional. You need to be careful." I typed back slowly. Too late for careful. I'm already in it. His response came immediately. Then document everything because when this breaks open, you're going to need proof. I stood and walked to my office window. Outside, September sunshine painted our neighborhood in shades of gold. The Sullivans were walking their dog. A delivery truck idled at the corner. Everything looked exactly as it should in a quiet Oregon suburb. But inside my house lived a stranger who poured coffee wrong. And somewhere in the Pacific, my daughter-in-law was checking into hotels with another man, while someone I'd never met watched our accounts and moved our money in carefully calculated increments. I thought about Eleanor, about how she used to tease me for seeing patterns in everything, numbers, behaviors, inconsistencies. She'd called it my accountant brain, always looking for what didn't add up. Well, Eleanor, I thought, nothing adds up anymore. My phone buzzed one more time. David with a final message that made everything worse. Me on that second. Device in Maui. It's been logging in every 4 hours. Someone's checking constantly. They know you're home. They're watching you watch her. Knowing you're being watched changes how you move through your own home. Every conversation becomes performance. Every gesture calculated. I'd built a career on reading people, on catching the small tells that revealed deception. Now I had to hide my own. Over breakfast, I started asking questions. Nothing aggressive, just casual conversation between family members who'd known each other for years. She was spreading jam on toast when I mentioned it. You know, I was thinking about that surgery you had. The appendix thing still bothers you sometimes, doesn't it? On your left side. She nodded without looking up. Yeah, especially when the weather changes. Gets a little tender. I took a sip of coffee to hide my expression. Rachel's appendix scar ran along her right side. I'd seen it countless times. This woman had just agreed to pain on the wrong side of her body. I let the moment pass, filed it away with the other inconsistencies. Later that morning, I found her reading in the living room. She looked up when I entered, that practiced smile appearing instantly. Brett mentioned he's been craving your homemade apple pie lately, I said. The one with the cinnamon lattice crust. You should make it for him when he gets back. Her face lit up. What a sweet idea. I'll bake one this weekend. It's been too long since I made that recipe. Rachel had never baked in her life. She told me once, laughing, that her mother had tried to teach her and given up after the third kitchen fire. Rachel bought pies from the artisan bakery downtown, the one Eleanor used to love. But this woman had just committed to spending a weekend baking something Rachel couldn't make. That afternoon, I tried something different. I was in the kitchen when she walked through, heading toward the back patio with a watering can. I called after her casually. Well, thanks, sweetheart. I appreciate you taking care of those herbs. She smiled and kept walking. Brett never called Rachel sweetheart. He'd called her sunshine since their first date. Rachel had told me the story half a dozen times, always with this soft expression that said the nickname still made her happy. The real Rachel would have paused, maybe corrected me gently, or made a joke about it. This woman didn't even notice she'd been called by the wrong endearment. My phone buzzed around 4:00. Brett checking in from Hawaii. They had dinner at Roy's last night. I managed to get a better look. The guy's wearing a name badge. Adrian looks corporate professional. They're not hiding anything. I called David immediately. I need you to run a background check. Adrian probably connected to financial services somehow. His response came faster than I expected. Already on it. Been digging since you mentioned the offshore accounts. This guy's interesting. Interesting? How interesting? Like, barely exists on paper. Employment history is thin. Shows up connected to a couple of consulting firms that dissolved under questionable circumstances. No criminal record, but I found two civil cases that got settled quietly. Both involved fraud allegations. I felt something cold settle in my chest. What kind of fraud? Financial restructuring schemes targeting individuals, not corporations. Both cases involved significant asset transfers right before divorce proceedings. The pattern was becoming clearer. Rachel hadn't stumbled into some affair. This was planned, calculated, professional. After David hung up, I stood in my office thinking about where someone might hide something they wanted kept secret but still needed to access occasionally. Rachel had claimed her old iPhone was dead, the screen shattered beyond repair. She'd switched to a new one about 6 months ago, but people don't usually throw away phones immediately. I found it in the master bathroom tucked in the back of the drawer where we kept old medications and forgotten cosmetics. The screen wasn't shattered. It wasn't even cracked. I pressed the power button. The battery showed 4%, but it was enough. The screen illuminated unlocked. She'd never changed the passcode. Messages loaded slowly. The phone struggling with its dying battery. A thread with someone saved only as I filled the screen. I scrolled through months of conversation, my pulse steady despite what I was reading. How much? Longer with the setup. Na needs another week. She's learning the routines. He suspects anything. But no, he's predictable. Won't check until it's too late. Na's doing great. The messages went back months. Planning coordination updates. I kept scrolling looking for anything that might tell me why. The phone's battery warning flashed. 2% remaining. Then I found it. A message from Rachel to Adrian sent 3 months ago. The timestamp showed late at night when Brett would have been on an overnight flight somewhere. Camden trusts me completely. Thinks of me as the daughter he never had. This will be easier than Florida. The phone died in my hand, screen going black. I stood in the bathroom, staring at the dark rectangle of glass and metal while that last sentence repeated in my mind. This will be easier than Florida. Not their first time, not even their second, probably. This was a pattern, a system, something they'd refined through practice. And somewhere in Florida there was another family, another victim, another story like mine beginning to unfold. I thought about victims I'd seen in court cases I'd reviewed for clients. The hollowed-out look of someone who'd lost everything to people they'd trusted. I'd felt sorry for those victims, but I'd never truly understood until now. Because I was about to become one of them. I slipped the dead phone into my pocket and walked back downstairs. The woman who wasn't Rachel sat in the living room reading her book, completely at ease in our home. She looked up when I passed. "Everything okay, Dad?" The word tasted wrong coming from her mouth now that I knew. Now that I understood she was part of something larger, more calculated than simple deception. "Everything's fine," I said. She smiled and returned to her book. I kept walking, kept my expression neutral, kept playing the role of the unsuspecting father-in-law. But inside everything had changed. Because now I knew this wasn't about a failing marriage, or a midlife crisis, or any of the normal human messiness that breaks families apart. This was business. Professional, organized, and apparently successful enough that they'd done it before in Florida to someone who'd probably trusted them just as completely as I'd trusted Rachel. That dead phone sat in my desk drawer like evidence I couldn't yet use. The reference to Florida gnawed at me. Professional cons don't start with million-dollar targets. They build up to them, refining their approach with each victim. I opened my laptop and started searching. Adrian Cross fraud elderly victims. The results came slowly at first. Then I added one more word. Florida. The article appeared halfway down the second page. Local news from Tampa, 18 months old. The headline read, "Retired. Accountant loses life savings to investment scheme." The victim's name was Harold Whitmore, 76 years old, widower. His wife Margaret had passed away 2 years before. According to the reporter, Harold had trusted a financial advisor who'd promised to help him invest Margaret's life insurance payout, $800,000 gone within 6 months. The article didn't name the advisor, but it described the method. Personal connection through a grief support group. Promises to honor the late wife's memory through smart investments. Transfers to offshore accounts that proved untraceable. This was Rachel's template. I called Frank Morrison, a retired cop, who still took private investigation work. I need your help with something personal this time. His tone shifted immediately. What kind of personal? The kind that involves my family and someone who needs justice. Frank listened without interrupting while I explained everything. When I finished, silence stretched between us. Finally, he spoke. Harold Whitmore. I remember that case. He reported it to Tampa PD, but the evidence trail went cold. By the time anyone started investigating seriously, the money was gone and so were the people who took it. Can you find him? I need to know if the woman he dealt with matches Rachel. Give me a couple hours. While I waited, Brett sent another update from Hawaii. A photo this time. Rachel and Adrian in the hotel lobby, his hand on the small of her back. Her face turned up toward his as they laughed. The body language was unmistakable. Frank called back faster than I expected. Found him. He's living in a care facility now. Lost his house after the money disappeared. I explained the situation. He's willing to meet. The next afternoon, I drove south through wine country. The coffee shop Frank had chosen sat on a quiet street corner, the kind of place that served as a community gathering spot. Harold Whitmore looked smaller than I'd imagined. He sat hunched in a corner, both hands wrapped around a mug he wasn't drinking from. Frank sat across from him, watching him protectively. I slid into the booth beside Frank. Harold looked up, and I saw the hollowed-out expression of someone who'd stopped trusting their own judgment. Mr. Whitmore, I'm Camden Pierce. Thank you for agreeing to meet. His voice came out quiet but steady. Frank says, you're dealing with the same people who took everything from me. I pulled out my phone and showed him the photo Brett had sent. This woman. Have you seen her before? Harold's hand shook as he reached for my phone. He stared at the image for a long moment, and I watched his face crumble. That's her. She called herself Rachel. Then, too, came to my grief support group 3 months after Margaret died. Said she'd lost her mother to the same cancer that took my wife. She cried with me, held my hand during the meetings. His voice broke. She seemed to understand the emptiness that comes with losing someone after 40 years together. That was the approach. Find the wound mirror. It used shared grief to build trust. She told me she was a financial advisor. Harold continued. Said she could help me invest Margaret's life insurance payout in a way that would honor her memory. I gave her everything. How much contact did you have with this man? I showed him a screenshot of Adrian. Never saw him. It was just her. But there were mentions of a partner sometimes, someone who handled the technical side. Frank leaned forward. Harold's been working with me to track down others. We think there might be at least 2 more victims between Tampa and here. Same pattern. Widowers' grief groups, financial promises. The weight of it settled over me. This wasn't opportunistic crime. This was systematic predation. Will you testify? I asked. When this goes to court, will you tell your story? He looked at me with eyes that had seen too much loss. If it means she can't do this to anyone else, yes, Margaret would want that. After Harold left with Frank, I sat alone staring at my phone. I opened our family's insurance portal. Something I hadn't checked in months. The beneficiary had been changed. 2 weeks ago, the same day Rachel left for Hawaii, Brett's life insurance policy, $2 million. Primary beneficiary, Rachel Pierce. The room seemed to tilt. Someone with access to our accounts had logged in and made the modification. The digital signature matched Rachel's login credentials. I called Frank immediately. It's worse than we thought. She changed the beneficiary on Brett's life insurance. $2 million. Frank, they're not just after our money. He understood immediately. You think they're planning something for your son? I looked out the window at the peaceful street. I think my daughter-in-law married my son as part of a long-term con. I think she's been planning this for 5 years. And I think Harold Whitmore is proof that when they're done with someone, they don't just walk away. Camden, you need to go to the police with what right now all I have is a pattern and a previous victim. I need more before I can prove anything. Then what are you going to do? I'm going to keep digging until I have enough evidence that no court can ignore it, because Brett's coming home in 2 days. And when he walks through that door, I need to be ready to protect him from the woman he thinks is his wife. That evening I was reviewing financial records in my office when I heard the sound of cabinet doors opening and closing in the kitchen. Then the clink of pots, the hiss of a gas burner igniting. I walked to the kitchen doorway. Na stood at the stove, her back to me, stirring something in a saucepan. On the counter beside her, a carton of heavy cream, a stick of butter partially unwrapped, a wedge of Parmesan cheese. My chest tightened. She glanced over her shoulder and smiled. I thought I'd make us dinner tonight. You've been working so hard. Fettuccine Alfredo, one of my favorites. I stared at the cream, at the butter, at the cheese. Rachel would never have brought those items into this house. 2 years ago, Rachel nearly died in this kitchen. It was a Saturday morning. She had made herself a latte using a sample pack of flavored creamer someone had given her as a gift. Within minutes, her throat began to swell. Her face turned red, then pale. She clawed at her neck, gasping for air. I called 911 while Brett grabbed the epinephrine pen we kept in the bathroom cabinet. By the time the paramedics arrived, Rachel was on the floor, trembling and barely conscious. The doctor at the emergency room told us she had suffered anaphylactic shock, a severe dairy allergy. He said if we had waited even 2 more minutes, she might not have made it. After that day, everything changed. We cleared the house of all dairy products. No milk, no cheese, no butter, no cream. Rachel became obsessive about reading ingredient labels. She would check them twice, sometimes 3 times before eating anything. At restaurants, she always asked the server to confirm there was no dairy in her meal. She carried 2 epinephrine pens everywhere she went. Rachel had not allowed dairy in this house for 3 years. Yet, here was Nena standing at the stove, stirring heavy cream into melted butter without a trace of concern. I kept my voice steady. "That smells good." "Thanks," she said brightly. "It'll be ready in about 10 minutes. I returned to my office and sat down, my hands shaking. I pulled out my phone and opened a note. Test 1. She brought dairy into the house. Rachel would never do that. 10 minutes later, Nina called me to the table. 2 plates of fettuccine Alfredo sat, waiting, the sauce thick and golden clinging to the noodles. The smell was rich, creamy, unmistakable. I sat across from her, fork in hand, watching closely. She picked up her fork and twirled a generous portion onto it. The creamy sauce clung to the noodles. She took a bite, chewed, and swallowed. No hesitation, no questions, no panic. I waited. She took another bite, then another. She ate steadily, casually, as if this were any other meal. She even smiled at me between bites. "This turned out really well," she said. I was worried I'd oversalted. My chest tightened. I forced myself to take a small bite of my own pasta, though I barely tasted it. I watched her fork move from plate to mouth again and again. She ate half the plate before pausing to take a sip of water. Still no reaction, no rash, no swelling, no shortness of breath, no reaching for an epinephrine pen. Rachel would never have taken even one bite. She wouldn't have cooked it. She wouldn't have touched the cream. She wouldn't have allowed it in the house. I set my fork down carefully. My hands were trembling, but I kept my voice calm. "This is delicious. Thank you." She finished the rest of her meal without incident. When she was done, she stood and carried her plate to the sink, rinsing it off before placing it in the dishwasher. Then she turned back to me with that same easy smile. "I'm glad you liked it. I think I'll head up early tonight. I'm a little tired." I nodded. "Sure, get some rest." She disappeared upstairs, and I sat alone at the table staring at the empty chair across from me. The woman in my house was not my daughter-in-law. I pulled out my phone and texted David Torres. She cooked and ate a full plate of Alfredo. No reaction. "It's not her." His reply came within seconds. "I'm on my way. Don't do anything until I get there." David arrived 40 minutes later. I let him in through the side door, and we stood in the dim light of the kitchen, speaking in low voices. He carried a small black case with him, the kind of equipment bag a tech specialist would use. "I'm going to sweep the house," he said quietly. "If they're watching you, there's a good chance they've planted something." I nodded, my throat dry. David moved through the living room, first running a small handheld device along the walls behind picture frames under tables. I followed a few steps behind, my pulse hammering in my ears. It didn't take long. He found the first device behind a framed photo of Brett and Rachel on their wedding day. A tiny microphone no bigger than a shirt button tucked into the back of the frame. The second was in the kitchen, hidden inside the decorative bowl we kept on the counter. The third was upstairs in the bedroom behind the headboard. David held up the last device between his thumb and forefinger, his expression grim. "They've been listening to everything," he said. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. Every conversation, every phone call, every moment I thought I was alone. They knew I was watching her. And now they knew I knew. David's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, then looked up at me, his face pale. "Camden," he said quietly. "Brett just sent me a message. He says Rachel and Adrian checked out of the hotel early this morning. They're not in Hawaii anymore." My blood ran cold. "Where are they?" David's jaw tightened. He doesn't know. David arrived at 9 the next morning, carrying a leather tool bag and wearing a navy polo shirt with a small logo embroidered on the chest. To anyone watching, he looked like a contractor making a service call. I opened the door before he could knock. "Well, morning, Camden," he said, his voice loud enough to carry. "Got your message about the Wi-Fi acting up. Let's take a look." I nodded and stepped aside. Na appeared in the hallway a moment later, wrapped in a cardigan, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. She looked tired, but her eyes were sharp. "Oh," she said, glancing at David. "I didn't know we were having someone over." "Just a quick fix," I said evenly. "David's helped me with tech issues before." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Would you like some coffee?" David set his bag down near the router in the corner of the living room. "That would be great, thanks." Na disappeared into the kitchen. I heard the clink of mugs, the hiss of the coffee maker. David knelt by the router and opened his bag, pulling out a small black device no bigger than a deck of cards. He glanced up at me and gave a single deliberate nod. We both knew what we were really here to do. He moved through the living room first, running the handheld scanner along the walls behind furniture under shelves. I stood near the window, pretending to check my phone. Na returned with 2 mugs of coffee and set them on the side table. She lingered for a moment, watching David work. "Is it a serious problem?" she asked. David didn't look up. Just interference happens sometimes with older routers. I'll have it sorted in a few minutes. She nodded slowly, then retreated to the couch cradling her own mug. Her gaze followed David's every movement. He found the first device behind the framed photo of Brett and Rachel on their wedding day, the same spot he'd checked the night before. He carefully lifted the frame, angled it toward me, and tapped the back with his finger. I saw it then, a tiny black disc, no larger than a button nestled into the wooden backing. David set the frame down and moved into the kitchen. Na stayed on the couch, but I could feel her attention sharpening. David crouched near the lower cabinets, opened his tablet, and pretended to adjust something on the screen. Then he turned the tablet toward me. The display showed a live audio waveform pulsing in green and red. Below it, a line of text read, "Active transmission offshore server installed 14 days ago." 14 days. The same day Nina had walked into this house. David moved upstairs next. I followed, leaving Nina alone in the living room. In my bedroom, he found the third device tucked behind the headboard, exactly where he'd shown me the night before. He held it up between his thumb and forefinger, then mouthed two words, 24/7. I felt my jaw tighten. David pulled a small Ziploc bag from his toolkit and carefully placed each device inside, sealing it shut. Evidence. Then he returned downstairs, made a show of adjusting the router, and packed up his equipment. "All set," he announced. "Should be good to go now." Na stood, her smile back in place. "That was fast." "Easy fix," David said. He glanced at me. "Let me know if you have any other issues." I walked him to the door. As he stepped outside, he leaned in slightly and whispered, "They've been recording everything. Someone's been reviewing the files." I nodded once. He squeezed my shoulder and left. I closed the door and stood in the entryway for a long moment, listening to the silence of the house. Then my phone buzzed. It was Brett. "Rachel and Adrian checked out early this morning. They're flying back tomorrow." "Dad, they're coming home." My chest went cold. "Tomorrow." They were cutting the trip short. They must have sensed something was wrong. I typed back quickly, "Stay calm. Don't let them know you're watching. I'll handle it." I walked into my office and closed the door. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through my contacts and found Margaret Stone's number. She was a family attorney I'd worked with years ago when Eleanor and I had updated our wills. "Sharp, thorough, and unshakable," she answered on the second ring. "A Camden," she said warmly. "It's been a while. What can I do for you?" I kept my voice low. "I need to file for legal protection before tomorrow. Police are ready, but this has to be handled quietly. My daughter-in-law is attempting to take control of family assets, and I believe she's planning to harm my son." There was a pause. Then her tone shifted, all business. "How much time do we have?" "It's less than 24 hours. I'll draft an emergency petition for a restraining order and asset freeze. I'll need documentation. Financial records, anything that shows unusual activity." "I have it." "A good. Send it to me within the hour. I'll have this filed by end of day." "Thank you, Margaret. We'll get through this, Camden. Stay safe." I hung up and immediately began forwarding files to her. The withdrawal records, the insurance beneficiary changed, the hotel charges, the offshore server logs. David had captured everything. By the time the sun set, I was exhausted, but I couldn't rest. That night I heard Nena on the phone. I had left my bedroom door open a crack, and her voice drifted up from the kitchen below. She was speaking quietly, but the house was old and sound carried. "He brought someone in to sweep the place," she said. Her voice was tight, anxious. "What do you mean you disabled them remotely?" "Fine, we stick to the plan. Just one more day, Adrian. What if he knows? There was a long silence. Then she spoke again, softer now. Okay, I trust you. See you tomorrow. I heard her footsteps on the stairs. I closed my door silently and stood in the dark, my pulse hammering in my ears. They were coming home tomorrow, and they thought I still didn't know, but I did, and I was ready. The email arrived while the sky was still dark. I had barely slept. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, and I reached for it, instinctively squinting at the screen. Frank Morrison. The timestamp read 6:47 inches the morning. The subject line was simple: "You need to see this." I sat up and opened the attachment. It was a scanned document, official and cold in its precision. A birth certificate from Salem, Oregon, dated 28 years ago. Rachel Marie Henley, born at 3:21 in the morning. Nina Marie Henley, born at 3:48 inches the morning. 27 minutes apart. Twins. I stared at the screen, my pulse thudding in my ears. The pieces fell into place with a sickening clarity. The identical faces, the mirrored mannerisms, the ease with which Nina had slipped into Rachel's life. They weren't strangers playing a part. They were sisters. Frank's email continued below the birth certificate, each line more damning than the last. Parents Michael and Susan Henley, both deceased, killed in a car accident when the twins were 19. No other family. The girls had been on their own ever since. Rachel's employment history: a string of short-term positions, each one connected to an older man or a wealthy family. Personal assistant to a real estate developer in Scottsdale. Executive coordinator for a hedge fund manager in Tucson, event planner for a retired tech executive in Boca Raton. None of the jobs lasted more than 18 months, and each one ended quietly with no forwarding information. Nas history: acting classes in Portland, a few bit parts in local theater, struggling, unemployed for the past 3 years until 2 weeks ago. Then came the name I'd been dreading: Adrian Cross. Frank had traced him back 6 years. 6. That was 1 year before Rachel had met Brett. Adrian had a record fraud investigations in Arizona and Nevada. Both cases dropped due to lack of evidence. 2 victims in Arizona, both elderly. Harold Whitmore in Florida, and now us. Frank's next paragraph made my chest tighten. Rachel met Brett 5 years ago at a charity gala in Portland. I checked the guest list. Adrian Cross was also in attendance, listed as a consultant for the event sponsor. The meeting wasn't accidental, Camden. It was orchestrated. I set the phone down and pressed my palms against my eyes. 5 years. Everything had been a lie from the very beginning. I remembered that night. Brett had come home glowing, telling me about the woman he'd met. She was kind, he said. She listened. She understood what it was like to lose someone. She had lost her parents young, just like he'd lost Eleanor. It had all been calculated. Frank's final note was the hardest to read. Rachel never loved your son. She studied him. She found his weakness, his longing for family after losing his mother, and she became exactly what he needed. This wasn't love, Camden. This was a performance. I sat on the edge of the bed, the phone still glowing in my hand. 5 years of dinners, 5 years of holidays, 5 years of watching Brett light up every time Rachel walked into a room. All of it had been theater. I thought of the way she'd learned to cook his favorite meals, the way she'd laughed at his stories, even the ones he told a dozen times. The way she'd held his hand at Eleanor's grave and told him it was okay to grieve. She had studied him like a script, and she had played her role flawlessly. I stood and walked to the window. The sun was beginning to rise, painting the sky in shades of pale gray and amber. Somewhere out there, Rachel and Adrian were on a plane flying back to finish what they'd started. But they didn't know we were waiting. I pulled up Brett's number and called. He answered on the second ring, his voice rough with sleep. "Dad, what's wrong? I need you to sit down," I said quietly. There was a pause. Then I heard the rustle of sheets, the creak of a chair. "Okay, I'm sitting." I told him everything. The birth certificate, the twin sister Adrian's history, the staged charity event, the years of planning. Brett didn't say a word. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. But Brett, when he finally spoke, his voice was hollow. 5 years. Dad. I loved her every single day. How could I not see it? My throat tightened. Because you loved her with a true heart. That's what makes you good son. And that's what made you vulnerable. He let out a shaky breath. I trusted her. I gave her everything. I know. Another long silence. Then his voice came back harder now. Steadier. "When does she land tomorrow afternoon?" 2:00 at Portland. "I'll be there," he said. "I need to see her face when we expose this." I gripped the phone tighter. "Brett, you don't have to." "Yes, I do." His voice was firm now, almost cold. "She took 5 years of my life, Dad. She made me believe we had a future. I need to look her in the eye when it all comes down." I didn't argue. I understood. Margaret has filed the paperwork," I said. "The accounts are frozen. The police are ready. When she steps off that plane, it's over." Brett exhaled slowly. "Good." We stayed on the line for a moment longer, neither of us speaking. Then Brett broke the silence. "Dad." "Yeah. Thank you for not giving up, for figuring it out." My chest ached. "You're my son. I would do anything to protect you." "I know," he said softly. "I'll see you tomorrow." The call ended. I stood at the window, watching the sun climb higher. Tomorrow, Rachel and Adrian would walk into a trap they didn't see coming. Tomorrow, the performance would end, and tomorrow, my son would finally see the truth. I just hoped he could survive it. Friday arrived with a brittle calm, the kind that comes before a storm. I woke early, dressed carefully, and made coffee in the kitchen as if it were any other morning. Na was still asleep upstairs. I had to keep everything normal. Just one more day. Margaret called at 8:15. "It's done," she said, her voice crisp and efficient. "The emergency orders were filed at 7 this morning. All joint accounts are frozen as of 9. Any attempted withdrawals or transfers will be blocked. The beneficiary changes on Brett's life insurance have been reversed. If Rachel or Nina try to access anything, they'll be denied and flagged immediately." I gripped the phone tighter. "What about the house?" "She's protected. I've also filed for a restraining order pending the outcome of tomorrow's confrontation. The police are coordinated. Camden, everything is in place." "Thank you, Margaret. We'll get through this," she said quietly. "Stay safe." I hung up and stared at the coffee in my hand. 9:00. In less than an hour, every financial door Rachel had pried open would slam shut. David arrived just after 9:30, carrying 2 large equipment cases and wearing a plain gray jacket. He gave me a single nod as I let him in. "Morning," he said, his voice low. "I'm here to install the security upgrade we discussed." Na appeared at the top of the stairs, wrapped in a robe, her hair loose around her shoulders. "Another technician." I kept my tone light. "David's upgrading the cameras. With everything that's been happening lately, I want better coverage." She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Okay, I'll stay out of the way." She disappeared into the bedroom. David and I exchanged a glance. Over the next 2 hours, David moved through the house methodically, installing small discrete cameras in the living room, kitchen, hallway, and entryway. Each one was legally compliant, time-stamped, and would record everything that happened tomorrow. When he finished, he showed me the feed on his tablet. Every angle was covered. "You'll have a complete record," he said quietly. "Audio and video admissible in court." I nodded. "Good." He left through the side door and I was alone again. That afternoon, I drove to a small coffee shop in Newburgh 20 minutes outside Pinehurst. Frank was already there sitting in a corner booth with Harold Whitmore. Harold looked older than he had the last time I'd seen him. His hands trembled slightly as he held his mug of tea. His eyes were red-minded, hollowed by grief and exhaustion. I slid into the booth across from them and pulled out my phone. I opened the photo Brett had sent me from the plane. Rachel and Adrian sitting close together, her hand resting on his arm. I turned the screen toward Harold. "Is this the woman who took your money?" Harold leaned forward, squinting at the image. His face went pale. Then his jaw tightened and his hands clenched into fists. "That's her," he said, his voice shaking. "That's the woman who promised to honor Margaret through smart investments. She said she understood what it was like to lose someone. She said she could help me make Margaret's memory mean something." His voice cracked. "She took everything." Tears rolled down his cheeks. Frank placed a hand on his shoulder. I leaned forward, my voice steady. "Harold, I need you to testify tomorrow. Can you do that?" He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and nodded. "Yes. I want to see her face when she realizes she can't run anymore." "Thank you," I said quietly. "They will pay for what they've done." Harold looked at me, his expression hollow but resolute. "I hope so. Because people like her, they don't just take your money. They take your ability to trust. They take your future." I knew exactly what he meant. I drove home as the sun began to set. The sky stray with orange and violet. When I walked through the door, the smell of roasted chicken filled the house. Na had cooked dinner. She was setting the table when I entered the kitchen. She looked up and smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You were gone so long," she said. I hung my coat on the back of a chair. "Just running errands." She poured 2 glasses of wine, but her hands trembled slightly as she set mine down. I watched her closely. She was nervous. We ate in near silence. Halfway through the meal, her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, then excused herself and walked into the living room. I stayed at the table listening. Her voice was low, but the house was quiet, and I could hear every word. "Rachel, he's acting strange," she said. "The accounts are frozen. I tried to transfer money this afternoon, but it was blocked." There was a pause. Then I heard Rachel's voice, faint but clear, coming through the phone on speaker. "Don't panic, Nina. If he confronts you, cry. Play the victim. Tell him you were scared, that Adrian manipulated you. Camden loves me. He'll protect me from the con man." Na's voice was shaky. "What if he doesn't believe me?" Another voice cut in. "Adrian, if that doesn't work," he said coldly, "we have plan B." Na hesitated. "What's plan B?" Adrian's voice was calm, almost amused. "Let's just say Brett's car won't be as reliable as he thinks on that mountain. Drive home." My blood ran cold. Na's breath hitched. "Adrian, you can't." "I can," he said. "And I will, if it comes to that. We've come too far to lose now." The call ended. I sat frozen at the table, my hands gripping the edge so tightly, my knuckles turned white. They weren't just trying to steal from us. They were planning to murder my son. I pulled out my phone and texted Brett immediately. "Do not drive your car until further notice. Have it inspected by a mechanic you trust. Your life may be in danger. This is not a drill." His reply came within seconds. "Understood. What's happening I'll explain tomorrow. Stay safe." I set the phone down and stared at the empty doorway where Na had been standing. She returned a moment later. Her face composed, her smile back in place. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Fine," she said lightly. "Just checking in with a friend." I nodded and took a sip of Wine, even though my stomach had turned to stone. Tomorrow, when Rachel walked through that door thinking she was safe, she would find out what happens when you threaten a father's son. Right now, Rachel has no idea what's waiting for her. She's about to walk into a room full of people who know the entire scheme. But before I show you that moment before the masks come off, comment the number 9 below if you're still here with me. I want to know who's invested in seeing this through to the end. Please note what follows includes fictional elements added for storytelling purposes and may not represent actual occurrences. If this content isn't for you, you're welcome to exit now. But if you're ready to witness accountability, stay right where you are. The car pulled into the driveway at 2:47 inches the afternoon. I was standing in the living room, hands in my pockets, watching through the window. The black sedan came to a stop near the front steps. The driver's door opened and Rachel stepped out. She looked exactly as I remembered. Burgundy sweater, pearl earrings, the same floral scarf Brett had described draped loosely around her neck. She pulled a small suitcase from the trunk, closed it with a soft thud, and turned toward the house. Her smile was bright, practiced, effortless. She had no idea. I heard the front door open. Her footsteps echoed in the entryway. "Dad, I'm home." Her voice was warm, familiar, full of that easy affection she'd perfected over 5 years. She set her suitcase down and walked into the living room, arms open as if to embrace me. Then she saw Na. Na was standing in the hallway, halfway between the kitchen and the stairs. She looked pale, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. For a split second, Rachel's face went blank. Her eyes widened. Then, just as quickly, she forced a smile back onto her face. "Mana," she said, her voice climbing an octave. "What are you doing here?" Na opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her eyes darted to me, then back to Rachel. Na stammered. "Rachel, he knows everything." Rachel's smile faltered. She turned to me slowly, her expression shifting from confusion to something harder. I didn't move. I kept my voice calm, steady. "That you weren't on a business trip," I said. "That you were in Hawaii with Adrian Cross. That your sister has Sansayas, Hawaii. That your sister has been living here for the past 2 weeks impersonating you." The room went silent. Rachel stared at me, her jaw tight. Then she laughed. It was a short, forced sound, almost disbelieving. "Dad, I don't know what Nena told you, but I know everything, Rachel." Her smile disappeared entirely. She took a step forward, her hands raised in a placating gesture. Tears began to well in her eyes. "Dad, please," she said, her voice breaking. "I can explain. Adrian was helping me investigate something. I didn't want to worry you or Brett, so I stopped." My voice cut through the air like a blade. Rachel froze. "Harold Whitmore," I said. "Florida $800,000. Should I continue?" The tears vanished. Her face went cold, hard, empty. The mask was gone. You can't prove anything," she said quietly. I held her gaze. "I don't have to. Harold will." Her jaw clenched. She was calculating now, searching for a way out. Then the front door opened again. Brett walked in. Rachel spun around, and for a moment I saw relief flash across her face. She stepped toward him, her expression softening, her hand reaching out. "Brett," she said, her voice trembling. "Thank God your father's lost his mind. He thinks I." Brett didn't move. His face was stone. "I saw you," he said. Rachel stopped. "What, in Hawaii with him?" Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Brett's voice was low, cold, controlled. "I was your pilot, Rachel. I saw you holding his hand, kissing him in the hotel lobby." Rachel's face drained of color. She took a step back, shaking her head. "Brett, no, you don't understand." "He don't," Brett said, his voice breaking slightly. "Don't lie to me anymore." She opened her mouth again, But before she could speak, the front door swung open. One more time. Adrian Cross walked in. He was tall, confident, dressed in a dark blazer and jeans. He looked around the room with a casual arrogance as if he owned the place. His eyes landed on me, and he smiled. Mr. Pierce," he said smoothly. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." I didn't respond. I just stared at him. Adrian glanced at Rachel, then at Na, then back to me. His smile didn't waver. "Rachel and I have been working together on a financial consulting project," he said. "If there's been any confusion about our relationship, I apologize, but I assure you everything has been perfectly professional." I took a step forward. "Is that what you told Harold Whitmore?" Adrian's smile flickered. "Just for a second. I don't know who that is," he said. "Liar." The voice came from behind him. Adrian turned. Margaret Stone stood in the doorway, flanked by two police officers in uniform. Her expression was calm, but her eyes were sharp as steel. "Adrian Cross," she said, her voice clear and measured. "You're being summoned for questioning in multiple fraud investigations. Officers, please escort him." Adrien's face went rigid. He glanced at Rachel, then at the officers, then back to Margaret. "I'm not going anywhere without a lawyer," he said. "That's your right," Margaret replied. "But you're going." The officers stepped forward. Adrienne's arrogance cracked just slightly. He shot Rachel a look, but she didn't meet his eyes. She was staring at the floor, her hands trembling. Then another figure stepped through the doorway. Harold Whitmore. He was smaller than I remembered, bent slightly with age, but his eyes were sharp and unwavering. He walked slowly into the room, his cane tapping softly against the hardwood floor. Rachel's head snapped up. Her face went white. "No," she whispered. "You can't be here." Harold stopped a few feet away from her. He looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "I broken," he said quietly. "I was. You did that to me. You took my wife's memory and turned it into a con. You made me feel like I had something to live for. And then you stole everything." Rachel's mouth opened, but no words came out. Harold's voice was steady, now stronger. "But this man gave me something back. He looked at me. Justice." Rachel's knees buckled slightly. She caught herself on the arm of the couch, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Adrian was handcuffed, now being led toward the door. He glanced back at Rachel one last time, his face twisted in fury. "You said this was foolproof," he hissed. Rachel didn't respond. She just stood there staring at Harold, her face hollow and pale. Margaret stepped forward, her voice calm and final. "Rachel Pierce, you're being detained for questioning in connection with multiple counts of fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. You have the right to remain silent." Rachel's eyes darted to Brett, to me, to Na. Then slowly she sank onto the couch and buried her face in her hands. Margaret set her briefcase on the coffee table and opened it with a soft click. The room was silent, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Rachel sat on the couch, her hands clenched in her lap. Na stood near the window, trembling. Brett leaned against the door frame, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. Adrienne stood near the entryway, flanked by the two officers. Margaret pulled out a thick folder and set it on the table. She looked at Rachel, her expression calm and professional. "Let's go through this systematically," she said. She opened the folder and pulled out the first set of documents. Receipts, hotel invoices, credit card statements, evidence, one, Margaret said. Charges made in Hawaii over the past 2 weeks. Fairmont Orchid Resort $2,847. Tiffany and Company $1,250. Roy's Restaurant in Wiki $384. All charged to a joint account shared with Brett Pierce. Rachel lifted her chin slightly. That's not illegal. I went on a vacation. I spoke quietly from where I stood near the fireplace. You told Brett you were on a business trip to Denver. Rachel's jaw tightened. She didn't respond. Margaret continued pulling out another document. A life insurance policy. Let evidence too. He said Brett Pierce's life insurance policy $2 million. The beneficiary was changed 3 times over the past 6 months. First to Rachel Pierce, then to a shell company registered in Delaware under the name AC Holdings, then back to Rachel Pierce 2 weeks ago. Brett straightened. His face had gone pale. 3 times, Margaret nodded. The shell company is registered to Adrian Cross. Adrian's face remained expressionless, but I saw his jaw tighten. Margaret set the insurance documents aside and picked up a printed email log. She turned to David, who had been standing quietly near the kitchen. Sister Torres, she said, would you explain what you found? David stepped forward, his tablet in hand. He held it up so everyone could see the screen. Lines of code email, forwarding rules, login timestamps. This is Rachel's email account. David said 2 weeks ago, she set up an automatic forwarding rule. Every email sent to Brett's personal and work accounts was copied to an offshore server. She's been monitoring your accounts, Brett. Every message, every transaction, everything. Brett's hands curled into fists. You were spying on me. Rachel said nothing. She was staring at the floor now, her face pale and tight. Margaret pulled out another set of documents, a court transcript, a police report, a printed photograph. Evidence for, she said, the testimony of Harold Whitmore. She turned to Harold, who was sitting in the chair by the window. He looked small, fragile, but his eyes were steady. Mr. Whitmore, Margaret said gently, would you tell us how you met Rachel? Harold's voice was quiet, but it filled the room. I met her at a grief support group in Tampa, he said. My wife, Margaret, had just passed. I was alone. Clear's throat lost. Rachel approached me after one of the meetings. She told me she understood what I was going through. She said she'd lost her mother to cancer. He paused, his hands trembling slightly on the armrest. She held my hand. She cried with me. She told me there were ways to honor Margaret's memory. Smart investments, legacy funds. She introduced me to Adrian. They promised me my wife's life insurance would grow, that it would mean something. His voice broke. They took $800,000. Everything Margaret left me. Everything. Rachel's face was stone. She didn't look at Harold. She didn't look at anyone. Margaret set the transcript down and picked up a printed screenshot. A text message, evidence. 5. She said a message from Rachel's old phone sent to Adrian Cross 3 months ago. She read aloud. The old man is easy to read. Won't check until it's too late. Brett's breath hitched. I saw his hands shake. Then Na spoke. Her voice was small, broken. I'm sorry, she whispered. Everyone turned to look at her. She was crying now, tears streaming down her face. I didn't know she'd go this far. Na said, I just wanted her to love me. She's my sister. She said she needed help. She said it was just for a few days. I didn't know about Brett, about the money, about any of it. Rachel's head snapped up. Her eyes went cold hard. Shut up, Nana. Na shook her head, sobbing. I can't do this anymore. Rachel stood suddenly, her face twisted with fury. She lunged toward Na, but Brett stepped between them, his hand out. Don't, he said, his voice low and dangerous. Rachel froze. She stared at Brett, her chest rising and falling rapidly. Then her expression shifted. The fury melted away, replaced by tears. Brett, she said, her voice breaking, honey, please. I really loved you. We can fix this. We can stop. Brett's voice was cold empty. 5 years, he said quietly. I trusted you with everything I had. I gave you my life, and you were never real. Rachel opened her mouth, but no words came out. Adrian moved toward the door. One of the officers stepped in front of him. Sit down, Mr. Cross, the officer said. Adrian's face darkened, but he didn't move. Margaret pulled out one final document, a printed request form. Official stampede evidence. 6, she said. 3 weeks ago, a consulting firm called AC Holdings requested access to Brett Pierce's auto service records from Mountain View Auto Shop. The request was submitted 3 times over the past month. Brett's face went white. What Margaret looked at him, her expression grave. They were trying to access your vehicle's service history, Brett. Maintenance logs, inspection schedules. Records of when you have your car serviced. Brett staggered backward, his hand gripping the door frame for support. They were going to sabotage my car, he whispered. Dad, they were planning to kill me. I stepped forward and placed a hand on his shoulder. My voice was steady, but my chest was tight with fury. Not anymore, I said. I turned to Margaret. She nodded and pulled out the insurance documents again alongside the service request forms. She laid them side by side on the table. Share this, she said, her voice calm and final as conspiracy, fraud, and attempted murder. Rachel's face crumpled. She sank back onto the couch, her hands covering her face. Adrian said nothing. His jaw was clenched, his eyes fixed on the floor. Harold spoke quietly from his chair. Justice, he said. That's all I wanted. I looked at Rachel, at Adrian, at the evidence spread across the table. You're going to get it, I said. One of the officers stepped away from Adrian and pulled out his radio. His voice was calm but urgent. Dispatch, I need state police and DMV investigators at this location immediately. We have credible evidence of possible vehicular sabotage. The room went still. Brett's face drained of color. The officer turned to him. Sir, I need information about your vehicle and your regular service. Schedule. Brett's voice was hoarse. Toyota 4Runner. Silver. I have it serviced at Mountain View Auto Shop every month. I'm supposed to pick it up tomorrow morning after the brake check. The officer spoke into the radio again. Alert, Mountain View Auto Shop, on Highway 26. Do not release vehicle registered to Brett Pierce. Repeat, do not release vehicle. Suspected brake tampering. Margaret was already on her phone, pacing near the window. I need the state police traffic crimes unit now. Yes, this is an emergency. Brett turned to me, his eyes wide with shock. Dad, if I'd driven that car, I gripped his shoulder. You didn't. You're here. Na was sobbing now, her hands covering her face. One of the officers stepped toward her. Ma'am, he said gently, do you know who had access to the vehicle? Na nodded, her voice breaking. Adrian has someone at the auto shop, someone who does the maintenance work. I didn't know what it was for. I swear I didn't know. Adrian just called him K. The officer wrote it down. Do you know his full name? Na shook her head. No, I only heard Adrian on the phone once. He said Kay will handle the Tuesday appointment. Margaret finished her call and turned back to the room, her expression grim. State police are sending an investigator to the shop. They're pulling the service records now. Adrian had been silent this entire time, standing near the entryway with the second officer beside him. But now I saw his body tense. His eyes darted toward the door, toward the window, toward Rachel. He was looking for a way out. Mr. Cross, the officer said, his hand moving to his belt. Stay where you are. Adrian's jaw clenched. Then in one sudden motion he lunged toward Na. He grabbed her from behind, his arm wrapping around her neck. She gasped, her hands clawing at his arm. Anyone moves, Adrian said, his voice low and dangerous, and I'll end her. Everyone froze. Brett took a step forward, but I grabbed his arm. The officer's hand hovered near his weapon, but he didn't draw it. Adrian's eyes locked onto Rachel. Keys. Rachel stared at him, her face pale. For a moment, she hesitated. Then slowly she reached into her pocket and pulled out a set of car keys. She threw them to him. Adrian caught them with his free hand, his grip still tight around Na's neck. Na's face was red, her breathing shallow. The officer drew his weapon, now holding it steady. Mr. Cross let her go. There's no way out of this. Adrian dragged Na backward toward the door, using her as a shield. She whimpered, her feet stumbling over the threshold. Open the door, Adrian ordered. Rachel moved toward the door, her hands shaking. She pulled it open. Adrian stepped onto the porch, Nana still locked in his grip. The afternoon light spilled across them. He glanced toward the driveway where Rachel's car sat parked near the curb. Then he stopped. Frank Morrison was standing on the front steps, blocking the path to the car. His hands were in his pockets, his expression calm. Not smart, son, Frank said quietly. 3 patrol cars just pulled up. You're surrounded. Adrian's head snapped toward the street. The sound of sirens grew louder. Red and blue lights flashed through the trees. His breathing quickened. His eyes darted from Frank to the officers to the street. His grip on Na tightened. For a moment I thought he might do it. I thought he might hurt her just to prove he still had control. I stepped forward slowly, my hands raised. Adrian, I said, my voice steady. It's over. Don't make this worse. Adrian's eyes met mine. They were wild, desperate. Worse, he said, his voice shaking. You have no idea what worse looks like. Na's face was streaked with tears. Her voice was barely a whisper. Please, Adrian. Please. Adrian's grip loosened just slightly. I saw his chest rise and fall. His jaw working. Then Na twisted hard and broke free. She stumbled forward and Frank caught her, pulling her behind him. The officers moved immediately, weapons drawn. Adrian stood alone on the porch, his hands empty, his chest heaving. The sirens were deafening now. Patrol cars surrounded the house, officers stepping out with weapons raised. Adrian looked at them, then at me, then at Rachel still standing in the doorway. Slowly he raised his hands. I want a deal, he said, his voice. I'll tell you everything, but I want a deal. One of the officers stepped forward and pulled Adrian's arms behind his back. The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut was sharp in the silence. You'll get your chance to talk, the officer said. Let's go. They led him down the steps, past Frank, past the patrol cars. As Adrian passed me, he turned his head, his eyes locked onto mine. This isn't over, he hissed. Brett's voice cut through the air, cold and final. It is. Adrian was pushed into the back of a patrol car. The door slammed shut. The sirens faded as the car pulled away. I turned back to the house. Rachel was still standing in the doorway. Her face was blank, empty. She looked at the spot where Adrian had been, then at Nena, who was sobbing in Frank's arms. Then at Brett. She was alone now. No Adrian, no Nena. Just the weight of everything she'd done. Brett walked toward her slowly. His face was hard, but his voice shook. You were going to kill me, he said. For what money? Rachel didn't answer. How long have you hated me? Brett asked quietly. Rachel looked at him for a long moment. Then, for the first time, her mask fell away completely. Her voice was soft, almost detached. I never hated you, Brett. She paused. I just never loved you at all. Brett's face crumpled. He turned away, his hand covering his mouth. I stepped forward and placed a hand on his back. He didn't move. He just stood there staring at the floor as the truth settled over him like a weight he'd carry for the rest of his life. One of the officers stepped forward, pulling a small card from his pocket. He began to read. Do you have the right to remain silent? Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. Rachel waved her hand dismissively. What's the point? You have all the evidence. The officer paused, then pocketed the card. He looked at her carefully. Do you wish to make a statement? Rachel didn't answer. She was staring at the floor, her hands folded in her lap. Brett stepped forward. His voice was but steady. I want to know why, he said. I deserve to know. Rachel looked up at him. For a moment her expression was unreadable. Then slowly she spoke. I met Adrian 6 years ago, she said quietly. I was 21, broke, angry. He taught me how to survive, how to identify men with money, how to make them trust me, how to take what I needed and disappear. Brett's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. The plan was simple. Rachel continued. 6 months, get close to you. Drain your accounts, leave. I felt my chest tighten. 6 months. That was all Brett had been worth to her. Rachel's voice softened just slightly. But then I met you, Camden. She looked at me, and for a moment I saw something that might have been regret. You were so kind, she said. You welcomed me like a daughter. You were so lonely after Eleanor and Brett. She paused. Brett loved me so genuinely it was overwhelming. Brett's hands clenched into fists. So you stayed. Rachel nodded. I convinced Adrian. I told him why. Take tens of thousands when we could take millions. Play the long game. Marry Brett. Wait for the inheritance. My stomach turned. Every dinner, every holiday, every moment I thought we were building a family, it had all been part of a strategy. But then you started updating your will. Rachel said, her eyes still on me. You restructured everything, set up trusts, made it so a divorce couldn't touch any of it. I had. After Eleanor's death, I'd been careful, protective. I'd wanted to make sure Brett's future was secure no matter what happened. Rachel's voice dropped. That's when Adrian came up with Plan B. Brett took a step forward. What was Plan B? Rachel hesitated. Her hands trembled in her lap. If you were gone, she said quietly, I'd inherit everything as your widow. No divorce, no splitting assets, just everything. The room went silent. Brett's face drained of color. You were going to have me killed. Rachel opened her mouth, but before she could speak, Na stepped forward. She's lying, Na said, her voice shaking with anger. Rachel's head snapped toward her. Na, don't. You're lying. Na shouted. Tears streamed down her face. You called me 2 months ago. You said Plan B was the only way. You said Brett was starting to suspect. You told me Adrian was handling it. You knew he was sabotaging Brett's car. Rachel's face went white. Nah, stop. Na pulled out her phone, her hands trembling. She scrolled through the messages and held the screen up for the officers to see. Here, she said. All of it. The dates, the plans, the insurance payout timelines. She knew everything. One of the officers took the phone and began scrolling through the messages. His expression darkened. According to what's written here, he said slowly, the plan was to target your drive home on Tuesday night. Highway 26, the mountain curves. Brett's voice was barely a whisper. That's the route I take after every late shift. Alone. At night the room fell silent again. The weight of those words hung in the air like a storm cloud. I stepped forward, my voice low and steady. You were planning to murder my son and make it look like an accident. Rachel's face crumpled. She shook her head frantically. No. No, that's not. Adrian said it would just be a brake malfunction. A minor accident. He said Brett would walk away with injuries. He said no one would die. He said, Brett's voice cut through her panic like a blade. A brake failure on a mountain road at night causes a crash. Rachel, there's no walking away when you go off a cliff at 60 miles per hour. I would have died. Rachel stared at him, her breathing shallow. Slowly, the reality of what she'd been part of seemed to settle over her. Her hands covered her mouth, her eyes filled with tears. I didn't, I didn't think. You didn't care. Brett said quietly. Rachel's shoulders shook. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing. The officer stepped forward, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. Rachel Pierce, he said, his voice formal and final. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and conspiracy to commit vehicular homicide. Rachel didn't resist. She just sat there, her face in her hands, as the officer pulled her arms behind her back. The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut echoed through the room. As they lifted her to her feet, she turned to me. Her face was stray with tears, her eyes red and desperate. Dad, she whispered. Please. My throat tightened. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. Don't call me that, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. You were never my daughter. Rachel's face crumpled. The officers led her toward the door. She didn't look back. When the door closed behind her, the silence that followed felt heavier than anything I'd ever known. Na stood near the window, her arms wrapped around herself. She was crying quietly, her shoulders trembling. Brett walked over to her slowly. His face was hollow, exhausted. Why did you do it? He asked quietly. Na looked up at him, her eyes red and swollen. Because she's my sister, she whispered. I thought family meant you do anything for each other. I didn't understand that family also means stopping each other from becoming monsters. Brett didn't respond. He just stood there staring at her, his expression unreadable. I walked to the window and looked out at the empty driveway. The patrol cars were gone. The sirens had faded. The house was quiet again, but nothing would ever be the same. I placed a hand on Brett's shoulder. He didn't move. He just stood there staring at the floor, carrying the weight of everything that had been taken from him. And I knew in that moment that healing from this would take longer than any of us were ready for. Before I reveal who had access to Brett's vehicle and nearly caused his death, comment, who, if you're still here, keep in mind parts of this story are fictionalized for impact and education. If you want to stop before the climax, now is your chance. Otherwise, stay with me. You're about to learn the identity of the inside man. My phone rang at 6:00 inches the morning. I hadn't slept. I'd spent the night sitting in the living room staring at the empty space where Rachel had stood just hours before. The house felt hollow, like something vital had been carved out of it. I answered on the second ring. Sketica Camden, it's Margaret. Her voice was sharp, alert. State police traced the service records to a man named Kevin Russo. He's been a mechanic at Mountain View Auto Shop for 18 years. Clean record until 18 months ago. I sat up straighter. What happened 18 months ago? His wife died. Cancer. Medical debt came to $250,000. My chest tightened. Adrian found another widower out. Margaret's voice was grim. It looks that way. Police want to bring him in this morning. They're asking if you and Brett want to be there. I didn't hesitate. Yes. 2 hours later, Brett and I stood in a small conference room at the Mountain View Auto Shop. The walls were gray, the table scratched and worn. Across from us sat Detective Sarah Coleman from the state police, a woman in her mid-40s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. David was there too, his laptop open in front of him. We've frozen Russo's access to the shop system. Detective Coleman said he doesn't know he's been exposed. Brett's face was pale. Kevin Russo, I've been bringing my car to him for 4 years. He just did my last brake inspection. David turned his laptop around. The screen showed a long thread of encrypted messages between a number registered to Adrian Cross. and another number traced to Kevin Russo. The messages spanned 10 months. David scrolled through them. How much longer his schedule changed. Tuesday, appointment confirmed. I'll handle the service. Brett leaned forward, reading the messages. His face went white. He was going to do the brake work himself. Sign off on the car. He'd sabotaged. Detective Coleman's jaw tightened. Where is Russo now? One of the officers standing near the door checked his radio. His shift starts in 20 minutes. We waited. At 8:47, Kevin Russo walked into the shop office carrying a metal lunchbox. He looked tired, his shoulders slumped, his face lined with exhaustion. He set the lunchbox down on a desk and reached for his clipboard. Then he saw us, his face drained of color. He froze. What's going on? He asked slowly. Detective Coleman stepped forward. Mr. Russo, we need to talk about your communications with Adrian Cross. Russo's eyes darted toward the door. He took a step back, but two officers moved in, blocking his path. I didn't do anything, he said, his voice shaking. David stood and held up his laptop. We have every message, every login, every falsified service invoice. You've been working with Adrian Cross for 10 months. Russo's hands trembled. He looked at Brett, and for a moment I saw something break in his expression. Guilt. Shame. Brett stood slowly. His voice was low, controlled, but it shook with barely restrained anger. You were going to sabotage my car, he said. You were going to kill me. Russo shook, his head frantically. No. No. Adrian said it would just be a minor accident. He said you'd walk away with injuries. He said it was just insurance fraud. That's all. I stepped forward. Adrian Leet. Brake failure on Highway 26 at night means you go off a cliff. You know that. Russo's knees buckled. He sank into the nearest chair, his head in his hands. Oh God, he whispered. Carla, my wife. Those bills. I lost everything. The house, the savings, everything. Adrian found me at a grief support group. He said he could help. He said it was just paperwork, just numbers. No one would get hurt. His voice cracked. He was crying now, his shoulders shaking. She was sick for 2 years. He said the treatments didn't work. The insurance didn't cover half of it. I watched her waste away and I couldn't do anything. When she died, I had nothing left. Adrian said he understood. He said he'd been through it too. Brett's fists clenched at his sides. I could see him struggling, torn between anger and pity. You trusted a con man over your own conscience, Brett said quietly. Russo looked up at him, his face streaked with tears. I didn't know it would. Detective Coleman nodded to the officers. Show us the vehicle. We walked across the lot to the service bay. The morning air was cold. The sky, a pale gray. Inside the bay, Brett's silver Toyota 4Runner sat, on the lift under bright floodlights. Russo led us to the undercarriage. He pointed to the brake lines near the rear axle. To hear, he said, his voice hollow. I cut the lines just deep enough to cause a slow leak. When you checked the brakes in town, they'd feel normal. But after 20 minutes of mountain driving downhill on Highway 26, they'd fail completely. Brett's voice was barely audible. Tuesday night, when I drive home alone exhausted, Russo nodded. One sharp curve. It would look like you fell asleep at the wheel. Detective Coleman motioned to the officers. Mr. Russo, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, attempted vehicular homicide, and fraud. The officers pulled Russo's arms behind his back. The sound of the handcuffs was sharp in the silence. As they led him toward the door, Brett stepped in front of him. Russo stopped, his head down, unable to meet Brett's eyes. 18 years. With this shop, Brett said quietly. I trusted you. When you saw me last week, said drive safe. What did you feel, guilt, or were you too busy spending Adrian's money? Russo didn't answer. He just stood there, his face hollow and broken. They led him away. David walked over to me, his expression grim. Adrian's lawyer reached out an hour ago. Wants a deal. He says he'll give up the full list of accomplices. Not just Kevin. He claims there are 5 others, across 3 different schemes. My blood went cold. 5 others, David nodded. This is bigger than we thought. Detective Coleman's phone rang. She answered, listened, and her face went rigid. What she said sharply. When she hung up and turned to me, her expression dark. Adrian Cross didn't make it to county jail. The transport vehicle was in an accident. The driver's fine, but Adrian escaped. The room went silent. My phone buzzed. I pulled it out. A message from an unknown number. You should have taken the deal, old man. Now things get worse. By 6:15 that evening. The house was surrounded. Officer Barnes stood on the front porch, his hand resting on his radio. 2 more officers were stationed at the back and side entrances. Their patrol cars sat in the driveway, lights off, but engines idling. Inside, Brett and I sat in the living room. The curtains were drawn. The lights were dim. Neither of us had spoken much since we'd left the auto shop. Brett broke the silence first. I can't believe Kevin, 18 years. I looked at him. His face was drawn, exhausted. Adrian finds vulnerable people. Widowers like Kevin, like Harold, like me 8 years ago. Brett's jaw tightened. He almost succeeded. I nodded. Almost. At 7:30 the lights flickered. Brett looked up. Power surge. I frowned. It's not storming. Officer Barnes's voice crackled through the radio on the table. Movement. East perimeter. I stood moving toward the window. Brett followed. Through the gap in the curtains, I saw a figure approaching from the tree. Small, slender, familiar. Rachel. Officer Barnes stepped into her path, his hand on his weapon. Ma'am, you're supposed to be in custody. Rachel stopped, her hands raised slightly. I posted bail. I have a right to be here. Brett's face went pale. I grabbed my phone and called Margaret. She answered immediately. How is Rachel out? I asked. Margaret's voice was tight. Her lawyer filed for bail this afternoon, argued that she has no prior record, strong community ties through Brett. And she paused. She claimed she's pregnant. My blood ran cold. Pregnant. The judge set bail at 500,000. She posted it 2 hours ago. I hung up and turned to Officer Barnes through the open door. Don't let her in. Rachel's voice rose sharp and desperate. Brett, I need to talk to you. I'm pregnant. Brett froze. His face went from pale to white. Don't, I said quietly, but he was already moving toward the door. He opened it, stepping onto the porch despite my objection. Rachel's face was streaked with tears. 8 weeks. It's yours, Brett. Our baby. Brett stared at her, his expression unreadable. You're lying. Rachel pulled a folded piece of paper from her pocket and held it out. I have test results. Doctor's confirmation. Brett, please. Whatever I did, this child is innocent. Brett didn't take the paper. He just stood there, frozen. I stepped forward, my voice low. She's stalling. This is a distraction. Rachel's eyes flicked to me, then back to Brett. I'm not. The sound of splintering wood cut her off. The back door burst open. Adrian Cross exploded into the house holding a crowbar. His face was wild. His eyes bloodshot, his clothes torn and muddy. Officer Barnes drew his weapon. Drop it. Adrian didn't drop it. He swung the crowbar in a wide arc, forcing Barnes back. Then he turned and stood between Brett and me, his chest heaving. Nobody moves, he said. Rachel stepped into the doorway, her face pale. Adrian, what are you doing? Adrian's eyes burned with fury. What you didn't have the guts to do. Ending this, I kept my voice steady. You're surrounded. There's no way out. Adrienne's smile was sharp and, I don't need an escape. I need a hostage. He lunged toward Brett. Brett dodged, grabbing a wooden chair and holding it between them like a shield. Adrian swung the crowbar, but his footing slipped on the hardwood floor. I grabbed the nearest heavy object, a thick hardcover book from the side table, and hurled it at Adrian's hand. It hit him square on the wrist. The crowbar clattered to the floor. Brett tackled him. They hit the ground hard and Officer Barnes rushed in with the other two officers. Within seconds, Adrian was face down on the floor, his arms wrenched behind his back. The sound of the handcuffs was sharp and final. Adrian was breathing hard, his face pressed against the floor. I have records, he spat. Documentation on all of you. I'll bury you. I looked down at him. We have nothing to hide. Adrian twisted his head to look at Rachel, still standing in the doorway. Tell them, he said, his voice desperate. Tell them you'll testify that I was coerced, that you were the mastermind. Rachel's face went slack with shock. What? No. Huck, you owe me. Adrian snarled. I gave you everything. I taught you everything. You were nothing before me. Rachel stared at him, and for the first time I saw something shift in her expression. Realization. He had never cared about her. She had been a tool just like everyone else. She looked away. The officers lifted Adrian to his feet. This time they weren't taking any chances. A reinforced transport vehicle was already pulling into the driveway. As they led him past me, Adrian spat one final threat. Your son isn't safe. I have people. You don't know who they are. They'll finish what I started. Brett stepped forward, his voice cold. Try it. Adrian's smile was vicious. What's a baby worth to you, Brett? How much would you pay to keep your child safe? Brett didn't answer. He just watched as they shoved Adrian into the transport vehicle and locked the door. Rachel stood on the porch, her arms wrapped around herself. She didn't say a word. Officer Barnes escorted her to a patrol car. She would be held without bail this time. The house was silent again. Brett sat down heavily on the couch, his head in his hands. I stood by the window watching the tail lights disappear down the street. My phone rang. I glanced at the screen. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. To Mr. Pierce, a woman's voice said, "This is Dr. Elizabeth Hartley. I'm an OB/GYN. Rachel Pierce came to me 3 weeks ago." I went still. Go on. She asked me to backdate a pregnancy test. She paid me $10,000. Her voice broke. I did it. I falsified the documents, but I can't live with it anymore. She's not pregnant, Mr. Pierce. She never was. I'm turning myself in tomorrow. I thought you should know. I closed my eyes. Thank you. I hung up and looked at Brett. He was staring at the floor, his face hollow. There's no baby, I said quietly. Brett didn't move. He just nodded slowly, his jaw clenched. Another lie. Another manipulation. Another piece of the nightmare Rachel had built around us. I sat down beside him and placed a hand on his shoulder. We sat in silence, waiting for the night to end. The courtroom was packed by 9 Monday morning. Reporters crowded the hallway outside, cameras flashing as we passed. Margaret led Brett and me through a side entrance away from the chaos. Inside, the air was heavy with anticipation. Rachel sat at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit, her hands cuffed in front of her. She looked smaller, somehow diminished. Her hair was pulled back, her face bare of makeup. She didn't look at us. Adrian was in a separate holding area visible through reinforced glass. 2 armed guards stood on either side of him. His face was bruised from the struggle at the house, his expression cold and empty. Judge Catherine Reeves entered and the room rose. She was a woman in her early 60s, sharp-eyed and no-nonsense. She took her seat and gestured for everyone to sit. "We're here for the arraignment of Rachel Marie Pierce and Adrian Michael Cross," she said. "Or multiple charges, including fraud, conspiracy identity theft, and conspiracy to commit murder via vehicular sabotage." Prosecutor Sarah Mitchell stood. "Your Honor, the prosecution requests remand without bail for both defendants. Mr. Cross escaped custody during transport. Mrs. Pierce used falsified medical documents to obtain bail. Both posed significant flight risks. Rachel's public defender stood a young man in an ill-fitting suit. Your Honor, Miss Pierce has no prior criminal record. She has strong community ties through her husband." Brett's voice cut through the courtroom from the gallery. "Ex-husband." The lawyer hesitated, then continued. "She is also pregnant. Detention poses medical risks." Prosecutor Mitchell stood sharply. "Objection, Your Honor. The defense has provided no verified medical evidence. We believe the documentation was falsified." Judge Reeves frowned. "Does the prosecution have evidence of this?" "We do, Your Honor. We'd like to call Dr. Elizabeth Hartley." A woman in her 50s stepped forward from the gallery. She was sworn in, her hand trembling as she raised it. "Dr. Hartley," Prosecutor Mitchell said, "did Rachel Pierce come to you 3 weeks ago?" "Yes," Dr. Hartley said quietly. "And what did she ask you to do?" Dr. Hartley's voice shook. "She asked me to create backdated pregnancy test results. She gave me $10 0 inches cash. I never performed any actual pregnancy test on her. She is not pregnant. I fabricated documents stating she was 8 weeks pregnant. I have since destroyed those documents and am turning myself in for fraud." The courtroom erupted. Rachel shot to her feet, her face twisted with fury. "She's lying. I am pregnant, Brett. You know." Judge Reeves banged her gavel. "Miss Pierce, sit down, or you will be removed from this courtroom." Rachel sank back into her chair, her chest heaving. Judge Reeves turned to Dr. Hartley. "Thank you for your testimony, doctor. This court orders an immediate medical examination by a court-appointed physician. Results will be sealed until verified." She turned to the prosecutor. "Continue." Prosecutor Mitchell nodded. "The prosecution calls Harold Whitmore." Harold walked slowly to the stand. He looked frail, his hands trembling as he gripped the rail, but his eyes were steady. "Mr. Whitmore," Prosecutor Mitchell said gently, "do you see the woman who defrauded you in this courtroom?" Harold pointed at Rachel. "That's her." "What's it? Can you tell the court how you met her?" Harold's voice was quiet but clear. "She came to a grief support group in Tampa. My wife Margaret had just passed. Rachel told me she'd lost her mother to cancer. She cried with me. She looked so kind. She said she was a financial advisor. She could help me invest Margaret's life insurance, honor her memory through smart investments." His voice broke. "I trusted her. She took $800, 000, everything Margaret and I saved over 40 years. I had to sell our house. I'm in assisted living now. It's all gone." He looked directly at Rachel. "You held my hand. You told me you understood, but you didn't. You stole my wife's memory." Rachel looked away. Prosecutor Mitchell called Nina Henley next. "Nah." Walked to the stand slowly, her eyes fixed on the floor. She didn't look at Rachel. "Miss Henley," the prosecutor said, "did you impersonate your sister at the Pierce home for 2 weeks?" Nah nodded. "Yes, Rachel asked me to." I didn't know about the plan to kill Brett. Not at first. I found out during the confrontation. They were planning to sabotage his car, cut the brake lines, make it look like an accident on the mountain road. Are you willing to testify against your sister? Na's voice was barely a whisper. Yes. What she did to Harold, to Camden, to Brett, it's unforgivable. Rachel stood again, her face red with rage. You're dead to me. Na finally looked at her. I've been dead to you for years. I just didn't know it. Judge Reeves banged her gavel again. Miss Pierce, one more outburst, and you will be removed. Rachel sat, her jaw clenched. Judge Reeves turned to face both defendants. Her voice was cold and final. I have presided over fraud cases for 18 years. This is one of the most cruel and calculated conspiracies I have ever encountered. Miss Pierce, you weaponized grief. You targeted widowers, vulnerable people, including your own father-in-law. She turned to Adrian. Mr. Cross, you orchestrated a conspiracy that targeted Brett Pierce for murder. You recruited Kevin Russo, exploited his grief and debt, and planned vehicular homicide disguised as an accident. She looked at both of them. Bail is denied. Both defendants are remanded without bail pending trial. Mr. Cross will be held at a federal facility under maximum security due to his escape behavior. Adrian sneered from behind the glass. Doesn't matter. My people are still out there. Judge Reeves's expression didn't change. Then I suggest you cooperate with investigators. Every day you refuse, your sentence gets longer. The guards led Rachel and Adrian away. Rachel didn't look back. Adrian's eyes stayed locked on Brett until the door closed. The courtroom began to empty. Brett exhaled slowly. It's really over. I shook my head. The arrests are but the trial sentencing. That's months away. Margaret nodded. The medical exam will confirm Rachel's not pregnant by this afternoon. Harold approached Brett slowly. Young man, I'm sorry you had to go through this. Brett extended his hand. I'm sorry for what they did to you. They shook hands. Two victims connected by the same nightmare. Margaret pulled me aside as we left the courtroom. The prosecution wants to talk about restitution. They've traced some of the funds. About 40% is recoverable, but there's a complication. I frowned. What complication? And it's mixed with money from other victims. They've identified 3 other families, all elderly widowers. In total, Adrian and Rachel stole approximately $3 million over 4 years. I felt sick. 3 million. Margaret nodded grimly. The FBI wants you to testify at the federal trial. Your investigation is the blueprint for their conviction, but it means you'll be pursuing this for months more. I looked at Brett standing with Harold near the courtroom doors. He looked exhausted but alive. Safe. I'll do it, I said. 6 weeks after the arrests, I sat in a conference room at the FBI field office in Portland. Agent Sarah Coleman sat at the head of the table, a laptop open in front of her. Around the table were 3 men I'd never met. They looked the way I felt, tired, hollowed out, carrying a weight no one else could see. Gentlemen, Agent Coleman said, thank you for coming. I know this isn't easy, but understanding the full scope of what Adrian Cross and Rachel Pierce did is critical to building the strongest case possible. She gestured to the man on her left. This is Thomas Brennan from Chicago. Thomas was 68, silver-haired, wearing a cardigan that looked too big for him. Robert Hayes from Phoenix. Robert was 71, thin and angular, his jaw tight with controlled anger. And Vincent Morales from San Diego. Vincent was 64, his eyes tired and distant. Agent Coleman looked at me. And you all know Camden Pierce. Thomas spoke first. My wife Anne died 3 years ago. Alzheimer's. A woman named Michelle approached me at a grief counseling group. She said she'd lost her father to the same disease. She told me about a memory care research fund. I gave her $650,000. He paused. Michelle was Rachel. Robert spoke next, his voice hard. My wife was killed by a drunk driver. A man named Marcus approached me, said he was a lawyer who could help me sue for a settlement. He got me 800,000. Then he disappeared with it. Marcus was Adrian Cross. Vincent's voice was quieter. My wife left me after 30 years. A paralegal named Sophie offered to help me protect my assets during the divorce. She gave Adrian access to everything. He took 420,000. Sophie was Rachel. Agent Coleman turned her laptop around. On the screen was a spreadsheet. The header read prospects. Columns name, age, net worth, vulnerability factors, completion date, status. I scanned the rows. Harold, Whitmore, Thomas Brennan, Robert Hayes, Vincent Morales. Then I saw my own name. Camden Pierce. Age 59. Assets $1.8, $8 million, vulnerabilities. Deceased wife plus son's marriage status in progress. The next line was Brett's name. Phase 2. Accelerate inheritance via incident. My stomach turned. Thomas's voice was hollow. We were just numbers to them. Agent Coleman closed the laptop. The good news is that we've traced about 40% of the stolen funds. Approximately $1.2 million. It will be distributed proportionally among the victims. Vincent let out a bitter laugh. So they still win. We don't get our lives back. I looked at him. No, they're in custody. They'll stand trial. That's not winning. Agent Coleman stood. There's one more thing. Kevin Russo was sentenced this morning. She played a video on the screen. Kevin Russo stood before a federal judge, his hands cuffed, his face pale. Mr. Russo, the judge said, you've pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and attempted vehicular homicide. Do you have anything to say before sentencing? Kevin's voice shook. Your Honor, I have cooperated fully with state investigators, but I accept full responsibility for my actions. There's no excuse. I nearly caused Brett Pierce's death. The judge's voice was firm. Given your cooperation with authorities and your guilty plea, I sentence you to 20 years in state prison. You will serve a minimum of 17 years before parole consideration. Kevin nodded his head down. In the gallery, a young woman sobbed. His daughter Ashley, 22 years old. I spoke quietly to the screen. That girl lost her mother to cancer. Now her father to prison. She's a victim too. Brett's voice came from beside me. I hadn't realized he'd joined us. He was watching on his laptop, his expression unreadable. I know, he said, but Kevin made his own choices. Later that afternoon, Brett called me from the airport. I'm about to do pre-flight, he said. How do you feel? There was a long pause. Scared. I trust my crew, but there's always a voice asking what if. That voice probably won't ever go away. I know, Brett said quietly, but I can't let Rachel and Adrian take flying from me too. They've taken enough. I heard the determination in his voice. You're right, they have. That evening I sat at the kitchen table reviewing restitution paperwork. My phone rang. Margaret, Rachel's trial date has been set. She said 6 months from now. But there's been a development. She's accepted a plea deal. What kind of deal? She's pleading guilty to fraud and conspiracy. The prosecution is dropping the attempted murder charge. Evidence issues. The car sabotage was technically Kevin Russo's action. It's difficult to prove Rachel actively participated versus simply knowing about it. What's her sentence? 12 to 15 years. She'll serve a minimum of 10. I exhaled slowly. And Adrian, he's not pleading. He wants a trial. The federal charges are fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, and escape. If he's convicted, he's facing life without parole. I closed my eyes. Good. Margaret's voice softened. Camden, this is almost over. The trial will happen. Justice will be served. I looked out the window at the darkening sky. It's not about justice anymore, Margaret. It's about making sure no one else ends up on that spreadsheet. Then we keep fighting, she said. I hung up and sat in the quiet house. Somewhere Rachel was in the cell. Adrian was planning his defense. Kevin was beginning 20 years in prison, and 3 other families were trying to rebuild lives that had been shattered. But Brett was flying again, and I was still here. That had to count for something. 8 months after the arrests. In the early days of spring, we returned to federal court one last time. Brett and I walked through the familiar hallways past reporters, who no longer chased us. We found our seats in the gallery. Last time we have to do this, Brett said quietly. How do you feel? He thought for a moment. Like I'm closing a book I never wanted to read. The gallery filled quickly. Harold, Thomas, Robert, Vincent. All of us together, one final time. Adrian was led in his ankles, shackled, his face thinner and harder than I remembered. He didn't look at any of us. Judge Marcus Stone entered the United States versus Adrian Michael Cross. The jury has found you guilty on all counts: federal fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, attempted vehicular homicide, and escape from custody. Before sentencing, this court will hear victim impact statements. Harold Whitmore stood first. His voice was steady. I'm 76 years old. When Rachel and Adrian stole my savings, I thought my life was over. But Camden Pierce found me, gave me a purpose: justice. Today I've recovered 40% of what I lost. Mr. Cross, you calculated that I'd be too ashamed, too broken to fight. You were wrong. Thomas Brennan spoke next. You used my wife's Alzheimer's as a mask. That wasn't theft. That was desecration. Robert Hayes's voice was tight with anger. You made me stop trusting people. That's the real crime. But I'm rebuilding that trust slowly. Despite what you did, Vincent Morales stepped forward. You made my ex-wife think I'd betrayed her. You destroyed my marriage twice. Then it was my turn. I stood feeling the weight of every word I was about to say. 8 years ago, I lost my wife to cancer. You targeted Brett, my only child, the only piece of my late wife I have left. You sent Rachel to seduce him, marry him, become family. For 5 years, she sat at our table, called me dad. Then you planned to murder him, sabotage his car, make it look like an accident on Highway 26. For money, I looked directly at Adrian. I've never seen cruelty like yours. You don't just take money. You steal hope, trust, the ability to believe in human goodness. But there's one thing you didn't count on. Family is stronger than your conspiracy. Brett is alive, healing, flying again. We're rebuilding. You failed, Adrian. Not because you were caught, but because you couldn't break us. Judge Stone's voice was cold and final. Adrian Cross, you are a predator. You targeted the vulnerable, widowers, the grieving, the lonely. You weaponized their pain. For federal fraud, 20 years. For conspiracy to commit murder, 25 years. For attempted vehicular homicide, 30 years. For escape, 5 years. Sentences to run consecutively. Total 80 years. Given your age, this effectively constitutes life without possibility of parole. Adrian's face finally changed. Reality had arrived. As the marshals led him away, he hissed. You haven't won. Brett's voice was quiet but firm. We have. Outside the courthouse, beneath blooming cherry trees, our small circle gathered. Thomas asked, What do we do now? I looked at each of them. We live. We trust again carefully. We honor those we've lost by not letting this define us. A month later, Na came to visit. Her hands trembled as she spoke. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I helped her. I lied to both of you. Brett's voice was measured. You also told the truth when it mattered most. You helped convict them. Rachel's sentencing happened separately. We watched via video. She stood in her orange jumpsuit, makeup-free, looking older. The judge's voice was firm. Rachel Pierce, through your plea agreement, you've been shown leniency. But 12 years in federal prison is not a light sentence. You will serve every day. 6 months later, 15 months total since discovery, I visited Brett's new apartment. He'd moved out of the house Rachel had lived in. I'm taking a management position, he said while cooking dinner. Training new pilots. He hesitated. I've been seeing someone. Claire, she's a nurse. We met at a coffee shop. Tell me about her. She's kind, genuine. Nothing serious yet. For now, I'm just enjoying something uncomplicated. He looked at me. Dad, thank you for seeing what I couldn't. For protecting me. That's what fathers do always. At home, I spoke to Eleanor's photo. We made it through L. Brett's okay. I'm okay. Not easy, but we survived. My phone buzzed. Harold, thank you again, my friend. Tomorrow, I visit Margaret's grave with fresh flowers. Another message from Thomas. Victim support group meeting next week. Hope you'll join. I typed I'll be there. Standing at the window, I thought about cycles and seasons. Rachel and Adrian took so much. Time, money, trust. But they didn't take everything. They didn't take our resilience, our ability to rebuild, our capacity to hope. We're stronger in the broken places, different than before. Changed but stronger. The next morning there was a knock at the door. Brett stood there with Claire. Surprise breakfast, Brett said. Claire wanted to meet you. Claire smiled, warm, genuine. I've heard so much about you, Mr. Pierce. I watched her for a moment, old instincts rising. Then I chose to let them go. Please call me Camden. Come in. I'll make more coffee. They stepped inside. Laughter, conversation normally. The door closed behind them. Life continuing. Not perfect, not unmarked, but real. And that was enough. To everyone who's journeyed with me from that first impossible phone call to this moment of healing, here's what nearly losing my son taught me about protection and survival. This family story became my awakening. God placed me exactly where I needed to be. Widowed, experienced in fraud investigation, and desperate enough to see what others missed. He didn't spare me from pain, but he equipped me to fight through it. My dad, revenge wasn't vengeance. It was a father's refusal to let evil win. When Rachel and Adrian targeted Brett, they miscalculated one thing. A parent's love is stronger than any conspiracy. But here's my warning, don't be like me. Don't wait until your child is 48 hours from catastrophe to act. I ignored subtle signs for months because I wanted Brett to be happy. That hesitation nearly cost him everything. Trust your instincts before crisis forces your hand. Verify the people closest to you, even when it feels uncomfortable. Dad, revenge stories like mine shouldn't have to exist. Prevention is always better than intervention. Every family story carries lessons. Mine screams, this vigilance isn't paranoia. It's responsibility. The dad revenge I had to pursue. Freezing accounts, gathering evidence, exposing conspirators exhausted me. But protecting Brett worth every sleepless night. Examine your own family story today. Are there inconsistencies? You're rationalizing relationships that feel slightly off. Don't dismiss those whispers of doubt. If this resonated with you, share it with someone who needs this message. Hit subscribe for more stories that challenge and educate. Comment below. What would you do to protect your family? Thank you for staying until the very end. Your time means everything. A reminder: this account includes fictionalized elements designed for educational value. If this material isn't right for you, please explore our other content that better suits your interests. Stay watchful, stay strong, and never apologize for protecting those you love.